Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the second episode of Spilling Tea with the G's. And we are so excited about our second guest today, Mallory from Lacuna Loft. So we'll get to her in a second. But again, just a reminder, we are doing a new one every week, launching it on Tuesdays. We are recording it beforehand and posting it on Tuesday. So definitely check it out. If you're on the YouTube channel, please subscribe. We're going to have some fun and exciting people on from the AYA cancer community. So we're super excited. And I'm Nick Galarakis. Steve, say hello so everybody can see your face.
Hey there, everybody. Glad to be back again for our second episode and really excited to get a chance to talk to Mallory today.
Awesome. Sweet. So let's get right to it. Mallory. So it's so funny, Mallory. We've known each other so long. Last name's Casperson, correct?
Yep.
Just like total like issue there. I've been butchering last names lately, and it's kind of funny since I think we have one of the tougher last names ourselves. So Mallory, welcome. You have been around the AYA community for such a long time, for better or for worse. Personally, I know it since you are also a survivor like my brother. So let's just kick it off right there. Kind of tell everybody a little about yourself, your journey in dealing with cancer, and then we'll get into the actual Lacuna Loft in a second. But go ahead and just kind of talk a little about yourself.
Sure. Thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here with the G's. Also, the name of this is awesome. Naming things is hard, and I think you guys did a great job.
Thank you. It is hard to name things.
Yeah, totally. So my name is Mallory Casperson, like Nick said, and my introduction to the cancer world actually happened when I was in undergrad. My mom was diagnosed with a brain tumor, so I became one of her two primary caregivers. Me and my dad kind of split some of those roles, and I was very fortunate to have the flexibility in graduate school to be able to kind of work from my parents' house during the last couple months of her life. So I was able to spend all that great time with my family. And I actually kind of hauled my then fiance, now husband, down with me. So he down, meaning I had traveled south. That's how I describe it, I guess. So he got a great introduction to my family in that way. And then a couple months later, I was back at school getting my master's degree, and I was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma about 2 months to the day of when my mom passed away. So it was a little bit of a trying, traumatic time, but I was able to do a clinical trial, which has kind of dictated standard of care now for Hodgkin's lymphoma treatments, which has been, I don't know, kind of cool, I guess, to see that happen, since, like Nick said, I have been in this world a little bit now. I'm 8 years out of treatment. So it's been kind of neat, I guess, from a scientific perspective to kind of see how things like that have progressed and how I got to play a little bit of a part in that. Yeah, and then I graduated with my master's and started a PhD, and just couldn't figure out why my life wasn't going back to normal. And I was having a lot of anxiety, and I just wasn't kind of the workhorse or the machine, as I like to say, that I had been in high school and undergrad, and in the kind of beginning parts of my graduate school, where I could just literally, I could work and not sleep for anything that I needed to do. And I just kind of basically stopped being able to do that. So my output drastically decreased, and I was still kind of actively figuring out how to navigate around that. And my advisor was not being overly compassionate about the situation. Now I know that there are all sorts of great things that one can help advocate for themselves. You can go into a disability type office, or a human resources or a student resources type of office, and get all kinds of accommodations. And having a cancer diagnosis and even being a couple years out still qualifies you. So I would definitely, for people who are in school, I would definitely check into those kinds of opportunities if that's something that you need, because I did not know that, and neither did my advisor. And I basically got kicked out of graduate school. So that's where I am right now. But I really liked what I did in graduate school. I really liked the research that I did as a PhD student and as a kind of beginning researcher. And so I really had no idea what I wanted to do with my life after that. It was kind of like a trifecta with my mom dying and then my diagnosis kind of redefining things. And taking so long to learn what young adult cancer was, because no one explained to me that being young adult was different, besides the fact that I just looked way younger than anyone else in the clinic. And I had the good cancer, of course, which a lot of people can say that across lots of different diagnoses. So kind of having my life direction very quickly change was also really, really difficult. And my nonprofit endeavor kind of grew out of that trifecta, I guess, by accident, very much by accident.
Got it. There's so much there. It's the first thing I want to just touch on, full cup. There's two things that come to mind just from that story there. And obviously Steve and I both know the story from what you're have gone through and where you are today. You're in a very unique situation at your age to have a mother who had cancer, then in turn you had cancer in such a short period of time. That's a very unique situation that not many people can sit there and say that they've been through that, which is probably a good thing that not many people can sit there and say that. What is also interesting, and you touched on a little bit from what you went through with grad school, and I think Steve can relate to this as well, is just in the school setting, the amount of resources, how different it is now versus then. And I think that's, part of the cool thing that you've started with Lacuna Loft, with a lot of the support that you have. But it's just, I hear that from so many different people now that we have Elephants in Tea as well, of, I wish this was there 10 years ago when I was going through stuff. I wish this was there when I was going through school or just had support through treatment. So it's just very interesting that you mentioned your own personal experience with that as well, and getting kind of grad school essentially. That I think that's talk about an area that is not, I think people outside of the AYA bubble don't recognize as a big issue for people. I know Steve, I won't put words in your mouth if you want to chime in on this, but like, you're still trying to finish undergrad and you're 29. And so it's just very interesting to me to hear that here's someone like yourself who is a veteran when it comes to being an advocate now, had gone through what a lot of people go through on a day-to-day basis with being an AYAer.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's just one of the classic things that the AYA community deals with so much, is that you don't know what you don't know. Yep. And so it's hard to ask for that. It's hard to ask for the support that you're lacking if you don't even know that you deserve it, or that it's available to you, or that, if this person doesn't think you deserve it or that it's available to you, that you should ask someone else. And I think the other kind of issue with people who work primarily with AYAs is that, they don't often deal with big life traumas with this age group. They don't often have to help navigate that. And so my board advisor just didn't really know what to do with me. Yeah. And so that kind of led me out. But I mean, it was uncomfortable, and it now I can talk about it, but I was part of just a study with a bunch of qualitative questions just a couple years ago, where someone asked me about, my college experience with cancer, and there were a lot of tears still. So it's been a process of kind of healing and growing, because it's hard when, things that are so ingrained in our identities need to change. And the things that are so ingrained in my identity that needed to change might be a little bit unique to me, but the fact that things that are ingrained in our identities often have to change is also very much a part of the young adult, the adolescent and young adult kind of experience when it comes to cancer, because so much shifts.
Agreed. Totally agree. And we are going to get to the Lacuna Loft part of things. Now I'm just picking your brain in the conversation we've had. Do you think what you experienced with your mom helped you in going through treatments, or was it kind of just it was just so different, the two scenarios did not help at all?
I don't really know.
That's okay.
Yeah, because there's that whole time period is basically just this odd blur in my brain, and my spouse remembers things differently than I do. Mm-hmm. There's this kind of story where when we, before I started treatment, I got a referral to some sort of reproductive person. I don't even know their title because I barely remember this appointment. And she explained a bunch of stuff with us and really sugar-coated it. Because of course this is, explaining IVF 8 years ago, which is like different in its success rate than it is right now. And my husband apparently, we went home and he pulled academic papers and was running like stats, like statistics, calculations. And I remember none of this. And like that helped determine whether or not we pursued, reproductive health stuff, which we didn't. But like, I don't remember any of that. And so I guess the one thing that it kind of helped me solidify was just the importance of really asking for what you need and not beating around the bush and not expecting the person in the same room with you who you think is going through the experience in the same way to understand what you need, and kind of vice versa, because throwing my then fiance now spouse into a caregiving situation with my mom was obviously very stressful, and I mean, it very much uprooted our lives physically and emotionally and, entirely. And it definitely gave us kind of a kickstart perspective in direct communication, empathetic communication, and all of those things, which I think are probably the basis of any important intimate relationship, whether, it's a friend or a caregiver, or a spouse.
Got it.
Otherwise, I would say no, I don't recommend it. Try to avoid it if you can.
Oh, one day we'll have to get your husband on this and to get his side of things on some of this stuff, because it is interesting, just the difference between, like you said, how, whether it's your partner or whether it's a family member, how they perceive what's going on and how different things, like for example, I forgot that Steve actually relapsed with his first cancer, like for a hot second. And when I was talking about it with him and our older brother, they looked at me like, what? And Steve had forgotten like 2 or 3 other things that Phil and I, my older brother, had remembered. And it's just very interesting that it seems to be, what's this? People think that just because something's traumatic, you're going to remember it, right? And that's just so not the case at all. That's the complete opposite. But
don't worry, Nick. I sometimes forget that I relapsed the first time too. So
yeah, just a few things going on in life. All right, so let's, rather than keep picking your brain and your past apart, Mallory, let's talk about Lacuna Loft, since that's why not only reason why, but the big reason why we have you on here. Tell everybody a little bit about Lacuna Loft and what really cool things you guys do, because we know, but let's let everybody else hear about it.
So Lacuna Loft kind of came about in this very organic process. Like I said, maybe I didn't say, all of my studies are in engineering. I'm an aerospace engineer by trade. I was an engineer for about 10 years. That's how far along I got in all of my school and fellowships and internships and all that kind of stuff. And so I started a nonprofit with very little knowledge and understanding underneath my belt of what that meant. But when I was in graduate school, I was in it wasn't that tiny, but like from big city perspective, it was kind of a small community. It was a college town in central Illinois. And if you were going to be treated in central Illinois, it was the place to go. It was definitely reputable. But the next 2 bigger hubs were Chicago to the north and St. Louis to the south. And so going down to St. Louis, Chicago would have provided the same thing, but going down to St. Louis allowed me to be in a clinical trial. And a lot of young adults do that. A lot of young adults, even if they're not traveling to a clinical trial, they're traveling to their treatments. And so there was almost no emotional support, almost no kind of psychosocial support during my caregiving, but definitely not during my diagnosis and treatment and into my survivorship. And there might have been something down at my treatment center, but it was 3 hours away and I was getting treated every other week. And I wasn't going to drive down for 3 hours to go back into a hospital that made me nauseous just to walk in the front door in order to get, some sort of support. And there was nothing in my kind of smaller college town unless you were a breast cancer diagnosis, which I'm not. I was diagnosed with Hodgkin's. And so there was nothing. And so I'm talking with family members and I'm probably complaining to my husband, let's not even call it talking, about how there's just like nothing now that I know that I can identify myself as a young adult survivor. And my mother-in-law actually suggested that I kind of check out one of the cancer support community type organizations, because Chicago suburbs have a lot of them, and they do, but you have to drive all the way up to Chicago suburbs in order to do that. It's like a solid 2 hours at the very, very minimum. And so there was absolutely nothing young adult specific and nothing kind of otherwise, unless I wanted to go into a support group with people who were on average 25, 30 years older than I was, maybe even more than that. So when I left graduate school, my spouse suggested that I do whatever I wanted for a year, which as a type A personality who had been planning something for a very long time sounded like nonsense. But I went with it, and I started a blog, and I started a blog basically to just talk about like the lifestyle experience of having cancer as a young adult, because no one would talk to me about that. I didn't know any other survivors, and the only thing my clinicians could tell me was, you know, whether or not I was cured and how to treat a certain symptom, and there was nothing for every other aspect of how a life changes. And so I kind of adapted the lifestyle blogs that I liked reading and made it cancer specific, and through that blog connected with hundreds of young adult cancer survivors, because I'd never met someone my age before starting that blog, and just, you know, actually going out there and looking for them. And kind of accidentally, therefore, had hundreds of conversations with people who shared so many different pieces of my experience, regardless of where they were diagnosed or what kind of cancer they had. And there were all of these overlapping issues, all of these overlapping pain points. And so I was talking to my mother-in-law one day, and she actually started a cancer support center type of organization down in the Chicago suburbs in the 80s. And it was very much at the forefront of kind of that movement of providing support for people through survivorship. And the biggest issue that I had was just the giant lack of it geographically located where I lived. And so Lacuna Loft started by accident as a blog, and then we slowly became a nonprofit and slowly developed programs. And now we run about 12 different programs, which keeps us very, very busy. But the core tenet has always been that Lacuna Loft provides online support for young adult cancer survivors. And we do that through programs, either through a video chat platform, which now a bunch of people are doing because of our pandemic, which is, the pandemic is not great, but the online options are awesome. And directly through our blog. So we have kept as kind of a core tenet that notion of keeping everything as accessible as possible, regardless of whether someone is located rurally or located, you know, even in an urban setting where getting across town at 5 p.m. is kind of not possible. Maybe you are stuck at home in isolation because of a pandemic or because of a bone marrow transplant. Maybe you're actually in the hospital. None of those are issues when it comes to developing and delivering online programs. And so in that way, we kind of open up the accessibility of this type of survivorship support that is so lacking in the clinical setting. And it makes sense that it's kind of lacking in the clinical setting, because I think that there's kind of a harmony that exists between, I was like stuck in my brain between harmonious and harmony.
That harmony, I tell you.
That's right. You got to get that.
Oh.
But there's a harmony that we can reach between the clinical settings and the nonprofits, where we're often getting the survivorship support. And yeah, it sounded so good before then.
It was great. No, that was fantastic. You and your harmony was just spot on. You know, it's really cool to me to hear how, whether it was intentional or not, it sounds like it was, but how you designed Lacuna Loft based on your own personal experiences, right? Of the access, or the lack of access for you as a patient, having to drive somewhere that's 2+ hours outside of where you're at. And plus, you know, knowing Chicago, it's great if you're close to the L, but if you're not close to the L, it can be a pain in the backside to try to get from one place to the next. So the fact that someone that is like you said, a bone marrow transplant, can't go anywhere, stuck on their inpatient floor for 6 to 8 weeks, even more, they can still have access to all your awesome online resources. I think that's really cool. Steve, do you want to say something? No?
Well, I actually did have a question, and pertaining to your to the online programs and the people you actually reach. I know as a male, as a man, we have a tendency to not want to seek resources. At least until years later. I had the chance to go to group gatherings, people that were actually AYAs, because I was sick in Cleveland, where we had a fairly large population of AYAs already, that even 14 years ago. But I had no desire to go. So I guess my question is, even with the online and the easier accessibility, do you see that kind of issue still, where less men come asking for help and actually joining these programs?
Oh yeah, for sure. I'd say that Lacuna Loft has solved many problems that the in-person kind of cancer resource center type places experience, in terms of like they have trouble getting young adults in the door, they have trouble keeping them once they're there. And we've solved all of that. But the gender split is still definitely something that we're working on, and I think most organizations are. I will say though that we don't offer any kind of formal support group type of opportunities right now. Things are very much peer support based and just really focused on getting this population connected to one another. And so I think that that does help a little bit, but it's really, really dependent on the activity. Like we had a comic drawing creative art workshop at one point, and it was led by a guy named Matthew, who draws Cancer Owl, which if you haven't seen Cancer Owl, you should definitely check it out. But that was super popular, and we had a 50-50 split, and I've never had a 50-50 split again. So I think it's all about the specific activity, because you gotta hook the guys in with something extra.
Extra.
But yeah,
I was gonna say, yeah, Nick, that's like unheard of.
Right. One time we made it happen.
I mean, I haven't even seen that, and I've been to a lot of them.
No, it's usually the guys are like a fraction of what an attendance of anything would be. Cancer Owl, you said? I've never heard of this.
Yeah. It's really good. He draws comics through his cancer experience, and then other people's too, but like with animal characters, and he is an owl, and it's so good.
Huh. I'm going to check this out. This sounds very interesting. Huh. So before we go deeper into some other questions about the programs you have, how did you come up with the name Lacuna Loft?
Yeah, my husband and I started naming things is hard. It's so hard. My husband and I started companies at almost exactly the same time. We like to say that we have dueling startups in our house. Drastically different missions, drastically different business structure, drastically different budgets, but it has been good to have a little bit of that kind of support in-house, literally speaking, and right now very literally speaking, because we're not going anywhere, obviously.
Nope.
But Lacuna means a brief pause or a hiatus, and a loft seemed like a cool place to hang out. So the idea that you could come to Lacuna Loft and kind of take that break, take that pause, figure out what a new normal is, for lack of a better term, because I know a lot of people do not like that phrase. I use it a lot. And then kind of reestablish and then move forward. So I like to say that we're kind of that hangout in between, when you're kind of refiguring out what life is, and you can do so safely with a bunch of other people who have also experienced cancer as a young adult.
Very cool. I love it. It's funny. I don't think I actually knew that before. So that's a cool. That's why you came up with that name. I love it. Okay, so back to what you guys do. Now that we got the skinny on the name, we do a weekly happy hour right now during COVID-19, and last weekend we had a handful of people talk about your unspoken ink workshops and classes. And for you, I guess this is a two-part question. What's your personal favorite workshop, class, or program that you guys put on? Secondly, what do you think is the most popular of the group, if you'd recommend something to someone?
My favorite is Unspoken Ink, but I'm kind of a writer by hobby, I guess. And so it's an 8-week writing workshop. It's kind of our most involved program in that the same group of survivors follow one another through the whole 8 weeks. It happens once a week for 8 weeks. I think the most popular programs are our writing workshop, Unspoken Ink, also our creative art workshops where people sign up for a specific activity. We send them a supply box in the mail with everything that they'll need. And then they attend the video chat at the, scheduled day and time. And there's usually a tutorial and they learn a cool new thing that they get to keep. But it also, brings a group of young adult cancer survivors together and kind of breaks the ice with, a cool activity that maybe they haven't done before. And we have had so many of those, so many really fun crafts and arts and kind of everything in between. Comic drawing, like I mentioned before, really everything from like comic drawing to like embroidery and everything in between. Our book club is also really popular, where we get about 24 books and give them free to young adult cancer survivors who want to participate, and they chime in each week with different thoughts and commentary on kind of groups of chapters or one chapter at a time, kind of depending on the book. And then we have like an online discussion at the end, which the author actually joined in on this last time, which was fun. So I'll plug Katie Gardner, who was wonderful in joining us and wrote a really great book called Brave Enough, which is something cool to check out. Yeah, we have a lot of different stuff though. The other ones that I think are really popular are just our really informal young adult cancer hangouts. They're just like online meetups. And sometimes we theme them. Like we did coloring recently and I colored a cuttlefish orally while hanging out with a bunch of survivors. And so I think basically, there are 3 main things that this population needs, kind of regardless of where they were diagnosed and what their diagnosis was, and we try to take care of as many of them as possible. One of them is that they really need to be connected to one another. I think a lot of young adults can voice that issue as being a primary one. There's a lot of isolations documented with young adult cancer survivors. They need their concerns to be validated. Because so many of us have stories of walking into a clinic and, we were misdiagnosed or it took forever to diagnose us because, we just we were too young for cancer, couldn't be cancer. And they need a safe space to do both of those things. And so Lacuna Loft just really works hard at creating that safe space for young adults to come together. And we kind of structure that into as many different types of programs as possible. We also have a really great Awkward Auntie program with Dr. Ann Katz, where people anonymously submit questions about sex and relationships after cancer, and she answers them. She specializes in that. She's a PhD nurse, and that's a really popular one too.
How does that one go? Because I've seen that before. It's intriguing, and I know because it's an area that we'd like to cover in each of the quarterly magazines is sex and sexuality. How does that one go? I think that would be just so cool, but also I could see people being very hesitant to join in on that conversation.
So that's why our programs are kind of structured in different ways. There is no video chat around that one, although we did do like a webinar kind of with Dr. Ann Katz at one point. So that's on our YouTube and on our website. So people fill out a Google form that's just anonymous, totally anonymous. We don't collect any data from it. So I can't even get back in touch with them if I wanted to. And then I forward those to Dr. Katz and she responds and I post it. And so people have to check back. But that way, you can really ask those questions that you're kind of afraid to ask anyone else.
Very cool.
And that maybe Googling is not the greatest idea, as we all know too, in the young adult cancer world, Googling things can get a little dicey.
Yeah, I would think Googling about sex topics too in general. Yeah, interesting on what's going to pop up on Google for sure.
Definitely.
Steve shakes his head at me. Tell me I'm wrong. Tell me I'm wrong. Yeah.
You're not at all. And so I guess along that, talking about the same vein of all these programs that you do, Mallory, at Lacuna Loft, what, obviously you had this idea of what you wanted Lacuna Loft to be, but you had, you have a very diverse set of programs, from talking about sexual health to all these other things. How did you come up with these ideas, these specific things? Was it from talking to patients, or was it just trial and error?
All of that. The great thing about running programs online and being basically an online only organization is that we can pivot very quickly if something's not working, if something's working well, but ... whatever that exception is. And so that's kind of how we've gone about growing our program set. I would say that because the kind of model comparison was always a cancer support community type of organization, that we've taken a lot of those core programs that have great data behind them, because I'm a data person, because I am an engineer by training. I love to scare my board with spreadsheets. That's a totally other topic though. So we've taken those core programs that work well, that provide the type of support that we're looking to provide, and we've adapted them to the young adult audience and brought them online. And a lot of that has been trial and error. Our first way of offering video chat programs was through Google Chat, which was wonderful, and it's free, but we had to assign organizational email addresses so that we could have more than 10 people in a G-chat together, and it was called G-chat at the time as opposed to Hangouts, and yeah, just basically learning things kind of as we go. I really wrangled my husband, he's over there, which is why I'm pointing, in the next room. That's not helpful. You guys aren't here with me. That's how my brain thinks. And I had him lead a drawing workshop at the beginning, which he did very well, but he was very nervous about. That was not his favorite way of being supportive of my endeavor. And then just listening to people, because the only reason Lacuna Loft came about, and I didn't just, go and find support someplace else, was because I was able to talk to all of these young survivors and realize that there were so many overlapping pain points. And so we do a lot of evaluation of our programs continually, so that it doesn't just, I'm a survivor and I'm a caregiver, but it can't just meet my needs. It has to meet, the needs of the broader group of young adult cancer survivors. And so it's been very important from the beginning to kind of listen to them as we're building things out. And sometimes, it's a cinch to do what, the next survivor is kind of asking for, and sometimes it's not. And so we just, take that one thing at a time. I also would talk, my board has trouble with this too sometimes. I treat absolutely everything that we do for the first couple times as an experiment, because I think everyone should do that with everything in their life, as long as there's not too much on the line. And that way we, no one's feelings are hurt when something needs to change a little, or when something didn't really work the way that we thought it was going to, or, people said they wanted one thing, but they weren't actually going to come to it, which definitely happens. So I think those are that's the way that I approach all of it, is to kind of think of everything as this great experiment. And once we kind of get into a groove, it solidifies kind of on its own.
Nice. Very cool.
I love it.
All right, pivoting to a different question here, a little bit off, maybe not off of Lacuna Loft, but one of the sayings at Elephants in Tea is, the elephant in the room, right? The elephant in the room is cancer, and that's one of the reasons why we have half of our name for Elephants in Tea. But do you have an elephant in the room that you want to bring up when in regards to cancer in general, or any other elephant in the room that you might want to talk about today? Putting you on the spot.
Yeah. I think it took me a really long time to just say that I was kicked out of graduate school, because I think I hold a lot of shame in that. And I think that while not everyone can say that they were kicked out of graduate school, I think a lot of people kind of, how do I want to put that? I think a lot of people experience big life shifts that they weren't planning, and that they weren't necessarily comfortable with happening because of young adult cancer. And the fact that I couldn't work as much as I did after my diagnosis was something I held a lot of shame around for a really long time, and was one of the reasons why I ended up starting Lacuna Loft, because I needed a workspace that I was kind of more in charge of in terms of determining what was considered compassionate working environment and what wasn't. And so every once in a while, when I'm super, super stressed about something, my husband is like, remember why Lacuna Loft started? you needed a space that was more understanding. And I'm just not, I'm not great at being understanding with myself, I think. And so I think that's kind of my biggest elephant in the room, is that it's neat to, it's kind of fun to say that I, you know, I'm an aerospace engineer by training, and that I worked with NASA, and that I, you know, did some of these cool, like very nerdy things. But it was definitely a really hard transition into, you know, whatever my next thing was going to be. And so I think that's, yeah, I think like anxiety and shame are just kind of like my elephants in the room that I'm going to blame cancer on. I don't know, is a pet peeve an elephant?
Yeah, why not?
Why not?
I think one of my biggest pet peeves, but like everyone's allowed to experience cancer in the way that they experience it. But when people try to get me to like, but really, what good thing came from your cancer? I'm gonna be like, no, that's not how I want to talk about this. Like, I mean, I met a lot of great people, and like my, you know, best friend and colleague, Ariel, I met through cancer, and I wouldn't have met any other way. But I just like wouldn't wish that upon anyone. And so it's hard for me to like, I'm not going to like say that nothing good happened out of my life past cancer or even because of cancer, but I really don't like it when people are like, tell me how much better your life is and you're so much more grateful and loving and empathetic because of cancer. No, I don't like any of that.
Well, it's funny that, oh, go ahead, Steve.
Well, so I was, if you don't mind, actually pivoting back to one of the things you said before,
Sure.
was talking about, you know,
Before I went off on a tangent about my pet peeve.
Hey, we
oh
have
no,
the
but it was
album
great though.
was-
But it's so, but it's along it though. So, you know, you mentioned how, you know, through all these transitions and everything, you know, you weren't kind to yourself, and I think it's something that, as all cancer patients, I feel like I can hope no one gets mad at me for making that broad generalization, but for all cancer patients, I find that we tend to be very hard on ourselves. And, you know, if it makes you feel any better, I got kicked out of undergraduate twice. So
Part of the kicked out club.
yeah, for similar reasons, health things, you know, and it took me a while to kind of, one, be able to say that. I used to say I got kicked out once. I didn't say the second part. But you know, we have to be able to be kind to ourselves and forgive ourselves, because, you know, here you are creating this whole nonprofit organization to take care of people's needs that aren't being met. And as you said, you're still not kind to yourself. And so I think it's a lesson for all of us, to put you on the spot here, unfortunately, that we all need to be kinder to ourselves. And so one thing I would say to you is just be able to forgive yourself, because you are doing wonderful things with Lacuna Loft. And I know our lives necessarily didn't go the way we want them to go, but, you know, what you're doing is incredible. So.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, and absolutely. I think that is very, very true. That I mean, that is one thing that I basically didn't have at all. I didn't have any sort of like self-care regimen before cancer. One of the reasons why some of our first programs were like crafting and creative based was because I had no calm hobbies before I started chemo, none. And I basically just decided that year for my birthday that I was going to buy a sewing machine. And I actually talked my dad into buying it for me. And I like watched YouTube videos to figure out how to sew. I have some really bad first experiments, but I will call them experiments from that set of hobbies that I kind of picked up. But yeah, absolutely. It's, I think we judge ourselves on a set of guidelines that we don't give to everyone else around us often. And so you're totally right. It's important to kind of take a step back.
So, and even just to add to that to what you both have said, because obviously I can only relate to a certain extent, right, on what you both have gone through, because, you know, while yes, my life changed when Steve was diagnosed several times with cancer, it's still not the same unless you're the one sitting there. So, like, for where I'm going with this is we did our Dear Cancer issue back in December 2019. Yes, 2019. I looked at the calendar for a second. And I was surprised at how many people thanked cancer. And I thought that was very interesting. And I think one of the cool things about that whole, I call it a project, even though it was one of our magazine issues, but it was just amazing to see the different emotions from people. And it's okay for everybody to feel differently on their cancer. One of the ways that when I wrote a letter, I would not have met my wife, would not have my child if it wasn't for Steve being sick with his second cancer. However, I've made it very clear I would never thank cancer, like just ever. And that's, I'm a sibling, I'm not a patient or a survivor, like the two of you are. But I think it's fair, Mallory, to basically give the bird, the big middle finger, F off to cancer, but at the same time, be thankful for where you are and the people you have met along the way, right? I don't think there's anything wrong in that. But
when
yeah,
I think
yeah, good.
that's what was so cool about the Dear Cancer campaign, and the kind of feeling that we try to create in all of our programs is just leaving the space open to feel what's necessary and support one another along the way. And so I think that part of the young adult experience is often being pigeonholed into, oh, it's fine, you're so young, you'll do fine, you look great, and those sorts of, you should be grateful, those sorts of feelings. And I think what's so powerful about the Dear Cancer campaign and just creating safe space for young adult cancer survivors is allowing them to kind of process how they need to. And sometimes that will be feelings of gratitude, and sometimes it'll be feelings of anger, and sometimes it'll be anything in between. But we have to create those safe spaces. We can't tell people how they feel.
Right. Can't tell people how they feel. And, I think it's also really cool that this community is very accepting of other people. I think that the AYAs, the current AYAs, maybe not the parents, but the ones that are actually going through it, really are able to welcome all the different feels one way or the other, right? I think that, to your point as well, continuing to make sure that there is a safe space like Lacuna Loft, like an Elephants and Tea, for people to go and be a part of that community. I think that's well said. Well said. Couple more quick questions for you, because I realize we're already, approaching the time that we said we would be on here today. We just keep going over. It's fine. This originally started off being a 15 to 20 minute video cast, and it's turning into close to an hour. So we'll get back to Lacuna in a second here, but how is it being a mom right now during COVID?
It's a little stressful. I think that being a cancer survivor in COVID is a little stressful. There's some, it's like dredging up feelings of like, oh my, was that just a dry cough? They say that you should watch out for a dry cough with COVID. It's like those kinds of things where, like, for years after my treatments were done, I would like sit there palpating my own neck, trying to see if I could feel any like rogue lymph nodes. And I feel like COVID kind of brings up the same sorts of things. And I'm dealing with some food allergies with my 7-month-old, which is also a little stressful. I feel like I'm staring at his face, like, is he going pale? Does he look normal? He's very pale, by the way. My spouse is very pale. So it's like, no, I think you're just your normal level of paleness. But I think it speaks. You can't see them, but they're laughing so hard. But I think it just speaks to the fact that when we go through really big life transitions, like caregiving and cancer and becoming a new parent, or, the opposite, learning that we can't be a parent in the way that we expected, and, kind of everything in between, that it's really important to have support and connection through that. There's this awesome, our main hashtag and kind of tagline is survival is insufficient. It is a Star Trek Voyager phrase, if anyone has ever wondered. I don't know exactly what episode, but you can just Google it.
I don't know why I've never caught on to that.
Oh yeah, Star Trek all the way. Don't tell.
It's ridiculous. Okay, continue.
But so it's so important to have other people to talk to validate feelings, and know that, it's not just you, it's you and 10,000 other people who are going through this experience at about the same time. So I think that being a cancer survivor has kind of helped me know how to reach out for support and that kind of stuff, which is really important, because Yeah, being a cancer survivor during COVID is stressful. Being a new parent during COVID is stressful.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, yeah, Nick, you know.
I know. I almost had a 4-month-old, which would have been a lie. We have a 2-month-old and like 3.5 weeks, so she'll be 4 months. So yeah, you can't do anything. So what did I say, Steve? So essentially 3 months.
Okay. 3 months, man. 3 months.
Say 3 months. All right.
I know you're bad at math, but
You two are the math people. I am not. That is not my forte, to say the least. Yeah, it's a whole new world, isn't it? And then to add the COVID part to it, and then adding in the layer. See, I can't talk. Not as bad as harmony, but close. Adding the fact that you're also a survivor on top of both of those is a whole new level of stress. Well, good luck.
Doing great.
Yeah, little Teddy. That's good. That's good. Well, I had to ask that, because I got to get a little personal every now and then. But I'm, everything's going to be just fine. We keep telling ourselves, right? We'll get through this crazy pandemic time frame. All right. What does Lacuna Loft have upcoming that you want to kind of tease for anybody out there?
Yeah, the good and bad about that question is that we kind of have a million things upcoming all the time. We have a Sephora workshop that's happening next week. We have a creative art workshop that you can actually sign up for coming up very soon, whereas our Sephora one is full. But we have a creative art workshop coming up at the end of May that will be announced next week. We have a writing workshop that will start mid-May that we'll announce next week that people can sign up for. We'll have a couple of young adult cancer hangouts this next month. We'll have lots of different opportunities to kind of connect with other survivors. We are launching something with Elephants and Tea and the Dear Jack Foundation, which will happen next month, which will be very good and very, very neat.
The week that this launches.
That's right.
Thursday.
That's right. So the month of May will be very, very full. And for people who are kind of listening to this after the fact, we basically have a set of programs that happen on a rolling basis. And so really just check out lacunaloft.org and then go into the rabbit hole of all that is there. The easiest way to kind of sign up for programs before they fill up is to be on the program mailing list so that you get notified for very specific programs when they launch. And then we will have something with Elephants and Tea later this year, which I'm also very excited about.
I appreciate the sneakiness there. Well done. Yes, we are very thrilled. Super excited. And so I guess, Mallory, long story short for everybody, go to lacunaloft.org, correct? To check everything out, right?
Yeah, the good and bad of being an online only organization is that absolutely everything is there and you can live anywhere that you want and still access it.
Nice.
Yeah, and we're growing all the time. So if there's something that you don't see, let us know because we're always interested in running more experiments and freaking out my board.
Can we record? We'll just cut that last part out and we'll just send that to your board for you and be like, love you.
For a while, I would come to board meetings and be like, so we have a new program. And they were just like, oh, Mallory.
Well played. Hey, got to keep them on their toes, right?
That's right.
That's our jobs. Very cool. So everybody, again, lacunaloft.org. Check out the programs. Sign up for the newsletter. And if you're able to help support them financially, do that too. Because everybody needs it right now. That's for sure. So this is so cool, Mallory. Thank you so much for joining us on our episode 2 of Spilling Tea with the G's. Any last parting thoughts? And actually, before you even say that, the thing that Mallory is teasing is not till the end of this year in December. More to come on that. We're very excited about that. But Mallory, any other parting thoughts? Or actually, even before Steve, anything you want to ask Mallory before I ask her for her parting thoughts? You can say no. It's okay.
No, I have nothing, man. Today was awesome. I'm so happy we got a chance to spend time with you, Mallory, and get to talk about Lacuna Loft and hear more about you as a person and what led you down this incredible path. So just thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. The last time I hung out with Steve was at like 3 a.m. in Denver, Colorado last year. So it's nice to see you during the day.
That was a stressful time.
I remember
we won't.
like you met Steve and you're like, oh, he's so cool. He's so like calm under pressure, and or the situation was going on, and I was like, oh boy. So I think I was like grandpa. I went to bed at like 8 o'clock that night, so I missed out on all the fun stuff, I guess. So
You're always grandpa.
yeah, just because I go to bed early or fall asleep on the couch. All right, I had a kid one day, and well, I guess I'm happy that I have a wife that feeds the kid and then they fall asleep. So, anyways, I'm stealing the thunder from Mallory on closing this out. Mallory, anything else you want to part ways with?
I would say that the big thing that I've been harping on lately is that, and I used this in a workshop the other day, is that we should, not should, because I don't want to put a should label on it, but I think that if we all approached our survivorship the way that we've been approaching cleaning out our closets since Marie Kondo came into our lives, that we would all feel so much better about things, because we should be taking opportunities and communicating about things that bring us joy, or in the very least don't make us miserable. So, whatever that next thing that, you need to do for yourself in your survivorship, just go ahead and do it. And if it means, cutting out a friend that's kind of negative, or sleeping that extra half an hour, or having that tough conversation with a caregiver, do it, because things will be so much better moving forward. And also know that finding other people who have been through cancer as a young adult is so life-giving. I have found it to be so life-giving. There's just so much to be said for not feeling like you're going crazy because you think you're the only one experiencing something. And I promise I have yet to find anything that I am the only one experiencing. And if you don't find it with Lacuna Loft, find it someplace else, because really, however you need to find it is valid.
Awesome, Mallory. Thank you so much for all that, and that was fantastic, and so true. I think that's a very good point. That yes, we always highlight Elephants in Tea. You always highlight Lacuna Loft, but there's so many other awesome organizations out there for people not to be afraid to go and check those out for sure. All righty, folks. Well, again, Mallory, thank you so much for joining us and telling us a little bit more about Lacuna Loft and all the awesome things you do. And as Steve mentioned too, for giving everybody else a little bit, opening the door on your personal life too as well. That's very cool of you. So with that said, everybody, thank you again for tuning in to episode 2 of Spilling Tea with the G's. Episode 3 next week, we are actually having 2 guests on. It is going to be Colin and Michael Farrow, the brothers from Epic Experience, since they have a very similar relationship and situation that Steve and I have. So we thought it'd be cool to have the Farrow brothers and the Galarakis brothers, the F's and the G's, as we are joking around with them. So it just sounds terrible, but we're going with it. So thanks again, everybody. Every Tuesday, tune in. We'll have a new video cast up and a new awesome guest like Mallory today. So thanks again, Mallory. Appreciate the time and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Absolutely. Bye-bye.